Welcome to the Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast, the space where research meets the real world. I'm Latricia Robinson, and in this episode, we look at the ways Black women use digital networking to adjust health and fitness goals. Digital fitness spaces are platforms that use digital technology to support and enhance fitness and overall health. These spaces are particularly important for Black women, as the most visible leaders in the fitness world don't always reflect our experiences. This lack of racial diversity when it comes to instructors, content focus, and health-related issues means that many Black women and others feel isolated or less welcome to pursue health goals. This week, Dr. Dion Stevens interviews Dr. Shanice Jones Cameron, an assistant professor in the Department of Communications at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. She researches health and wellness discourse distributed through social media, focusing on Black women's health and well-being digital networks and communities. Dr. Jones Cameron is also the founder of Her Guided Evolution, a digital platform, podcast, and YouTube channel that hosts conversations about self-development and encourages women to practice holistic self-care and prioritize their well-being.
So Dr. Jones Cameron, you're really doing some cutting edge work around Black women's health and fitness broadly as it fits into digital spaces. And I'm wondering if you could start off by situating what we mean or what you're meaning when you're talking about Black women's digital health.
That's a great question. I want to kind of take it, just kind of giving you all like the broad context, and then I'll kind of bring it down to specifically what I mean by Black women's digital health and well-being spaces, communities, and networks. So while I was a PhD student at UNC Chapel Hill, when I began doing research, I noticed that a lot of the literature about Black women's health tended to focus on Black women's experiences with illness and disease. And while that research is tremendously important, very important, I noticed that one perspective that was not necessarily represented in academic literature were the conversations that Black women were having on social media about their health and well-being.
Right.
And the reason why I thought this was so important was because informal helping networks have been integral to Black women and Black people's survival. And considering that, I thought that it was extremely important to highlight areas where Black women in particular were exercising agency in regards to their health and well-being. And so I noticed there was this staunch contrast between like my Instagram feed, for example, as I'm scrolling and looking at Black women who practice yoga, Black women runners, Black women who are interested in eating nutritious and healthy diets. And I just thought the academic kind of perspective of the literature was not necessarily representing that. And I think this is also important because honestly, a lot of the discourses, just being for me, a Black woman, of course, a lot of the discourses that we kind of defer to every day to talk about Black women's health, I just thought those had the capacity to be very disempowering. Of course, we often hear statistics about Black women in the United States are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth. And although these are very important issues, very important statistics that all of us need to be aware of, I also firmly believed and believe currently that there's more to Black women's health than that. And so, as I mentioned, staunch contrast between like my Instagram feed and the academic literature, I noticed this completely different perspective. There were Black women on Instagram creating communities surrounding running, eating plant-based diets, yoga, of course. And this just offered a more hopeful and optimistic perspective that I thought was very important for scholarship as well as just Black women generationally for us to begin seeing our health more from these perspectives. So when I say Black women's digital health and well-being networks, what I'm referring to are digital spaces, so spaces on social media and on the internet where Black women are coming together with the focus on health and well-being in some capacity. And of course, that's constructed very broadly. So where are the spaces where Black women are using social media, leveraging these information and communication technologies to advocate for their individual health as well as the collective health of Black women and Black people across the African diaspora?
One of the articles that you wrote about that really sort of captured my attention, and it was one of your earlier articles, was about the yoga and the online. What did you find with that study? Maybe you could share with us your major findings and what was important, you think, specifically for Black women.
Yeah, so Black Girl Yoga and the article that I wrote about that digital space was one of my, as you mentioned, kind of my early interventions and explorations of this problem. I think what's particularly notable from the findings of that study is this idea of intra-racial communication between Black women. And one of the aspects that I think is kind of emblematic of other people creating kind of these spaces where Black women in particular can come and discuss health and well-being is this notion of intertextualizing. And what that is, and what I'm referring to with that, is taking yoga principles, for example, or something that's not necessarily seen as directly connected to Black and African American culture in particular, and drawing connections between Black African American culture and discourses and the other body or school of thought. So it would be Black women yoga spaces talking about the Sanskrit in yoga, but also bringing in quotes from Oprah or having like images of influential Black leaders in the physical yoga spaces. So it is the understanding and the recognition that Black women can benefit from these knowledges that are not necessarily tightly coupled and associated with our communities, but we can use these schools of thought and kind of combine them with our own cultures and traditions to create more of a welcoming atmosphere for other Black women who may be interested in practicing yoga, for example, or eating a vegan diet or doing long distance running. So it's Black women's capacity to take other schools of thought, other knowledges, combine them with discourses that may be more familiar to us as Black women and Black people, and combining those to create something that is welcoming and inviting, and simultaneously kind of pushing back on some of the assumptions about wellness and well-being and assumptions about Black women and Black womanhood.
One of your newer articles is about Black Girls Run. And as I told you, I was so thrilled to see that because I am a member of Black Girls Run in South Florida. So it was nice to see this academic lens. I'm wondering if you can talk about how this space online has really translated to the real world.
Really interesting. Yeah. So Black Girls Run is based on the digital ethnographic research that I did for my dissertation. So one of the things that I thought was particularly notable coming out of my dissertation research is this idea that oftentimes Black women would seek out digital spaces because the real world physical wellness spaces were unwelcoming to them. It's this idea of, because of our modern society and information and communication technologies being so accessible, particularly to Black women in the United States, these digital wellness spaces became opportunities for Black women to find community and to relate to each other and find other Black women who are interested in these health and wellness topics that they likely would have a more difficult time accessing in the real world or in real life, as we would say. as well as there were a lot of women in the study who talked about, yeah, I met this particular person through the Instagram hashtag. And now this is one of my good friends that I now am in community with and am connected with. It's also with Black Girls Run in particular. Part of what the women that I spoke to, one of their intentions with posting themselves on Instagram and posting the time that it took for them to run a mile that may not necessarily be like elite running paces, they did that with the intention of making running seem a bit more accessible to other Black women. So they would post themselves running, and they were very adamant that their purpose behind that was to invite other Black women to participate in running. So these digital wellness spaces and digital wellbeing networks are very much connected to the real world, be it the real world is bringing Black women to these digital spaces to find community, or these digital spaces are inviting Black women into these wellness practices and these wellness activities, which Black women then begin to enact in their real lives.
So it's having this sort of, it sounds like, a form of representation for Black women to see themselves, and also empowering. Why do you think that's particularly important for Black women when we're thinking about their health broadly?
Yes. So one of the findings that I think relates to that very well is this idea that across the different digital networks that I studied, one of the fundamental goals and aims of Black women participating in these wellness spaces was this sense of, I want to help advance and improve the health of Black folks across the diaspora. So they showed like a keen awareness of health disparities between, for example, Black folks and white folks in the United States, which oftentimes is the shape that health disparities research takes, of course. And so, of course, like Black people in the United States, according to the CDC, are more likely to suffer from lifestyle illnesses and at earlier ages than our white counterparts, be it lupus, type 2 diabetes, heart disease. So the participants that I spoke with who were active in these wellness spaces, that was often in the forefront of their minds. They thought about it from the perspective of them as an individual, like, oh, my grandfather suffered from this ailment, so I am a runner or eating a vegan diet in order to try to avoid some of the similar ailments that may be running in my family. But it was also, of course, this emphasis on their family. They wanted to, for example, like show their daughters that you too can be a runner. You can do whatever you want, even though when you get on Google or pick up Runner's World, you may not necessarily see yourself represented in these spaces. So it was very much this intergenerational emphasis on health and well-being. And of course, this kind of falls in line with the work of Michelle Tracy Berger, for example, who talked about Black women and Black daughters and seeing health intergenerationally. So it was very much this emphasis on, I am connected to other Black folks through these technologies and through social media. So I want to use these technologies not only to better my own health, but also to think about my family's health as well as Black folks more broadly, knowing that we struggle and suffer from health disparities that are, of course, inextricably linked with institutional racism as well as other social determinants.
Thinking about that, specifically the institutional racism, do you think it's really important that these spaces are very racially and gender specific?
I think it is important. And part of the reason why I say that is because just something about being a Black woman and being in community with other Black women, there are life experiences and hardships that we navigate that nobody is going to understand like another Black woman. And that can range from something really serious or something that is just something that we may kind of think about as like a colloquialism among Black folks. So, for example, when I was doing the interviews for Black Girls Run, one of the things that came up quite frequently was this understanding that as a Black woman, if I'm going to be a long distance runner, I need to figure out what I'm going to do with my hair. Like someone else that's not a Black woman may kind of think like, well, that's not necessarily something that needs to be like a huge consideration. But Black women, for us, we know that that's something that we have to keep in mind and we have to navigate. And it's not just the girl, what I'm gonna do with my hair and how can I need to wrap up my hair. It's also the very real understanding that Black hair is stigmatized. And of course, these oppressive ideas about beauty, and particularly more phenotypically African standards of beauty that may not necessarily be prioritized in the United States. So these kind of issues that we can look at and relate to each other and know that no one else can kind of understand us like a Black woman on these issues, I think is really important, particularly when we are thinking about the process of the digital network and then enacting kind of some of what we're learning from these digital networks in our real lives. Now, that's not to say that I don't think that more heterogeneous groups are not necessarily effective.
Right.
Not necessarily, not at all. But I think each of these have their places. Black women, I think we need these digital wellness spaces as well as just spaces where we know it's going to be focused on Black women. As well as I think we can also be in relation and be in community with folks who are not Black women. But I think both of them simultaneously are really important.
Do you think there are any risks for Black women in these digital spaces?
Yes, absolutely. And this is actually related to one of my newer research areas where I'm just kind of trying to explore and understand these spaces from more of a comprehensive standpoint. But I think one of the biggest risks to Black women's digital wellness spaces and the internet in general is misinformation and disinformation. Of course, in our modern society where you don't necessarily have to have the credentials to comment on certain things or to talk about certain health issues, and you can still build an audience and kind of be looked at and deferred to as an expert, I think that can be particularly concerning, especially when you think about from the vantage point of the influencer, which I think the term and how we understand influencers is certainly changing. However, I think that the quantitative assumption that's applied to this person has a big following, so they must know what they're talking about when they talk about, I need to drink flat tummy tea in order to lose weight. Like these become, I think, some of the problematics of any wellness space, but particularly for Black women, because we know that it's happening in this broader context of oppression, health disparities, controlling images of Black women. So I think that's something that we always have to be very aware of and kind of trying to keep that in mind as we are joining these digital wellness spaces, supporting these digital wellness spaces, as well as thinking about how we navigate our real lives in conjunction with these wellness spaces.
What do you think, or where do you think we should be looking next in terms of Black women using these digital networks and social media to identify and engage in their health holistically?
Really good question. So I think that moving forward, I think it's important to focus on these really niche health communities. I think Black Girl Yoga, for example, is a great example of that. Black Girls Run and certainly the digital networks that I study. But thinking about the trajectory of the internet and how we are kind of becoming more focused and niche, I think these become fertile areas for research. It gives us insight into Black women, not as monolithic, but Black women who are a diverse population with a number of interests, with a number of motivations. And I think therein lies the opportunity for health interventions. Recognizing that what motivates a Black vegan, for example, may be connected to and similar to a Black woman yoga practitioner, but they may have completely different interests. I know my research in particular, I tend to focus on Black women millennials. And of course, some of that has to deal with like the demographics of Instagram, which is where a lot of my research is done. But I think these niche wellness spaces give us an opportunity to see Black women in all of our like variety and different perspectives. And I think that is going to be one of the areas of opportunity moving forward. Just kind of noting that Black women, we're not monolithic. We all have different perspectives and views, and we bring that to the way we think about and approach health as well.
That was Dr. Shanice Jones Cameron discussing Black women's cultivation of health and fitness representation in digital spaces. To find out more about Dr. Jones Cameron, including assessing her research projects, articles, and social media handles, go to this episode on our website podcast page. Thanks for listening to the Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into this week's topic. If you're interested in hearing more about how research is being applied in the real world, head over to psychologyofblackwomanhood.com to sign up to our email list. We'll send you updates about each new episode and our related activities. If you enjoyed this episode and you would like to support the podcast, you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. That's all for this episode. Thanks for listening.